How's everybody doing? Hopefully everybody's having a fantastic week. I would love to hear, jump in the chat. One, let me know where you're logging in from. Two, how you're doing, what's going well. I appreciate sort of the conversation that's happening in the chat and happening on the main page. I would love to hear what else other people are experiencing, what's going well, what we're struggling with, if anything. And if everything is firing on all cylinders and you're doing amazing, share that as well. I mean, that's part of it, right? Some days we just have a freaking awesome day, and don't be shy, right? Celebrate that. Step into that and be happy about that and share that with other people. It helps to uplift other people as well. And if you're having a rough day, put that in there. Let other people step up and sort of shore you up and support you. But definitely keep the chat and the conversation going. The one question I have is, everyone able to access the course material? So there's some pre-recorded stuff that I've put together. I just want to make sure that everyone's able to access this. So whether you're watching live or when you come back and watch the recording, if you can comment, please, if you're able to get that. And if you can't, please let me know that as well, so I can make sure that everyone has access to that, so that you have that additional information. Where I go through common misconceptions, right? Things that I think, there's just a lot of information out there and it's hard sometimes. And that was one of the conversations earlier. What's difficult right now about maintaining your health and wellness is just, there's so much information out there on the internet, and it's really hard to understand, well, what's right, what's wrong. There's some conflicting things out there. Unfortunately, sometimes, depending on the education and the experience of the physician and the provider, you may even get conflicting information between two seemingly experts. So it can be challenging. It's hard. So I get that. So I'm doing my best to, again, being somebody who's gone through all the medical education, but then has tacked on that lifestyle medicine, tacked on that additional knowledge to say, okay, how do we truly maximize our lifestyle for health? I try to provide that information to you so that you can hopefully make some simple changes that stick and that are sustainable, so that you can create the life that you're looking for. You can navigate perimenopause and menopause, so that you come out and you continue to live a life that brings you joy, and that you're healthy and living an amazing life full with, good memories with family and all the things. So if you can't access that information, where I go through some of that and we take it in chunks. The first section is on epigenetics, and that's what we've been going through this month of July. And then next month, we'll start to go into nutrition, and we just sort of march through on the monthly basis. So if you aren't able to access that information, please put that comment in there. And even if you are, just let me know that you are, so that I know that folks are taken care of and can access that information. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is, again, epigenetics, right? Just an overall concept, but more specifically around autoimmune disease. Again, and this is where I get how this information can be challenging, because even as I went through medical school, sort of autoimmune disease it's genetic. It is what it is. You're at risk. Some people may get it, some people may not. But it wasn't something, at least during my training, during my education, that I really felt like you had much control over. It was just sort of, did you draw the short straw because it was part of your genes? And now, again, we're understanding that we may actually have more control over whether that expression I left off. Hopefully I'm back on. So I'm going to repeat in case we kind of lost each other. So like I said, we're going through epigenetics this month. And, one of the things I wanted to hone in on are autoimmune diseases. So again, when I, going through medical school, going through our, my education as a physician, you know, we were taught those are your genes, right? And whether or not you get it was just seemingly kind of a short straw. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but most of that was not under your control. And now we're understanding that expression, or whether or not you express that genetic susceptibility to something, you may actually have more control over than not. And that's what that's what epigenetics is, right? Whether or not you turn that on, that genetic susceptibility to a thing. And in this case, we're going to talk about autoimmune diseases. So the ones that we've researched so far that, I can say you have control over, again, I can't promise anything, but certainly you can stack the deck in your favor. I'm talking rheumatoid arthritis, lupus as well. Certainly the bowel diseases, Crohn's, celiac, maybe. And then another one that again is a maybe is MS. So I would, think about, what can you do to start stacking that deck in your favor? And why does that happen? Why is it that we have this genetic susceptibility, but what are the choices that we're making that is potentially turning on those genes, flipping that switch so that we express that susceptibility? So if you haven't listened to the gut lecture, that may be helpful because all of that starts in your gut. So there's a vast majority of our immune system that comes from our gut. And autoimmune is, again, an immune process. So what happens is there's something that your body perceives as foreign, and it creates antibodies to, but it's really just you, right? So if you think about, something foreign, something on the outside that you get exposed to, a bacteria or a virus from the outside comes into you, your body perceives that as foreign, it attacks it, creates antibodies, tries to kill that foreign thing. That's your immune system. That's a good thing. That's what we want. Now, the unfortunate thing when it's yourself, when there are things within you that the body is perceiving as foreign, it creates sort of an immune response to. That's the etiology, the origin, the beginnings of an autoimmune disease. Well, if you think about it, if most of that behavior, most of that process is happening as in your gut, so the question is, why are there things that we are reacting to that are really innate to ourselves? Well, again, in that gut lecture, Wendy did a fantastic job, I think, of explaining kind of that gut lining, right? We want those tight junctions like a fence, right? We want that to be really tight. So your gut, if you think about it, it's a hole, it's a lumen, and then it's lined by cells. And those cells need to be really tight, that fence post, so that things that we eat, things that we ingest, that we take in, stays within the gut. You don't want that leaking out between the fence. You don't want kind of that warped fence where the boards are getting a little lax. You can kind of see through it. You can see your neighbor across the way, right? You want those really tight junctions. So when we get that warped fence kind of scenario, there are things that may be leaking across that cell membrane, that lining. It's going into the bloodstream. It's not supposed to be there. And the body says, holy moly, this is not supposed to be here. This is not me. I don't recognize it. And it creates antibodies, hence the beginnings of autoimmune disease. Another one that I didn't mention earlier is thyroid disease, right? So hypothyroidism specifically. So when that happens, when we start to create this immune response to ourselves, then we develop these autoimmune diseases. So then you back up and say, okay, well, are there any things that we can do to control how tight our fence? All right, hopefully I'm back. I apologize for that. So again, what affects that tight junction, right? What creates, a leaky fence, or that warped fence, and what creates a nice tight fence or tight cell junctions? when we get that warped consistency, that's something called leaky gut, which hopefully most of us has heard about right now. So what are those things? What are those choices that kind of change the integrity of our cell lining in our gut and make it possible for things that shouldn't to start to cross that cell membrane and get into our bloodstream and then initiate that autoimmune process? So the things that we know are, let's just talk nutrition. So nutrition, the foods that are really inflammatory, that create a lot of inflammation, chronic inflammation in our body, are going to be the things that are going to weaken those cell junctions, going to sort of warp your fence, so to speak. So what are those foods? Foods that are highly processed, things that come in a bag, in a can, that've been sitting on the shelf for years. They no longer look like the food. Highly processed foods are going to do that. Similarly, the pizzas and the, I don't know, gosh, sometimes I have a hard time thinking about all these things, but, things that are just, they're have a lot of oils, a lot of saturated fat, and they're highly processed products. Those are going to weaken that cell junction. They're going to give you more sort of warping in your fence, therefore allowing products that you've eaten to come across that cell lining and into the bloodstream. The other thing are going to be animal protein in general is pro-inflammatory, and in turn, again, is going to change that cell lining, weaken those junctions, and create an opportunity for things to get across and leak into your bloodstream and create sort of an immune response that could be working against us. I will say high on the list of animal protein are going to be processed meats, and we'll go through cancers a little bit later, but processed meats really increases our risk of colon cancer specifically. So processed meat, I would say red meat is pretty darn close on that same level on its ability to really create an inflammatory response and to really break down that cell wall and that make that really loosen those tight junctions. So processed meat and red meat. And then we can kind of go a layer down and say, again, any kind of animal protein. So eggs and cheese and dairy, even your lean proteins, your chickens and your turkeys, your fish. And again, depending on what your goals are, depending on the medical history you have, depending on whether you're trying to lower your risk or you're trying to truly reverse disease, is really going to dictate how much of that, once you say, okay, I'm going to take out processed meat and red meat, because we know that's kind of top layer, that's really going to make negative impact on that cell, that tight junction. Once you get beyond that other grouping, depending on your goals, you can consider saying, okay, do I need to get rid of everything or can I keep some things in? And that's where you're talking to your primary doc. If you happen to be one of my patients specifically, that's something that we are actively talking about or have talked about. So that is more of a conversation with the healthcare provider, your physician, to talk about how deep you need to go into that depending on your goals. Again, the healthiest is to remove animal protein without a doubt, right? But if we're not ready for that, because that can be challenging, and some people just they're not interested in that, and that's okay. But we need to know that we're moving in the right direction for our goal. So that's another group that is really pro-inflammatory. Then we talk about sort of the added sugars, right? And this usually comes from processed things. Those foods that are really have a tremendous amount of added sugars are going to do that. What else? high saturated fats. That usually comes from animal proteins typically. Obviously if we're doing a bunch of fast foods and that's all processed, right? All that stuff is processed foods. So those would be the key things that are going to really weaken that cell lining and give us the tendency to have things scooch across that shouldn't and create an autoimmune response in our body and put us at risk. Again, epigenetic changes. You may have the gene, but it doesn't mean it gets turned on. You have the ability to control whether that switch gets flipped. And then you look on the other side. So how do you protect yourself? How do you repair your gut, right? So if you've already got the situation where you have an autoimmune disease, or you want to know how to lower your risk significantly. So what do? You want to eat whole food, mostly plants. By having that as a general operating system, right? A general parameter, that automatically means you're going to be eating a higher fiber diet. That fiber is what repairs your gut. That fiber is what gives you that tight fence again. That's what's going to create those tight junctions in your cell and start to repair that leaky gut. So again, eating foods that are whole food that looks like food, mostly plants. That's what's going to be really anti-inflammatory, and it's going to do the best job of repairing the cell lining, because that inherently ends up being a high fiber diet. We want to be working towards eating, a nutritional pattern that is high in fiber, upwards of 30 to 40 grams of fiber a day. And when we fill our plate with vegetables and fruit and whole grains, rather than refined and processed grains, so whole grains, that inherently will give us a high fiber diet. That, as well as being really generous with your water consumption, is huge. So certainly increasing your water intake is going to be good in repairing that cell wall, creating those tight junctions as well. And then we can even start to go into other non-nutritional things, right? So sleep is one of them. Getting exercise is another one. And my God, stress. Holy moly, stress. Again, we are all susceptible to stress. We are all under a tremendous amount of stress. So it's not that we want to remove it, nor can we really ever remove stress, but it's about how do we create skills and tools and tips to manage that stress and to lessen its impact on our health. And those are all things we're all going to be doing together. So again, when it comes to autoimmune disease, yes, it can be in your family. Your mom, your dad, your aunts, your uncles can all have autoimmune disease. Yes, you have a genetic susceptibility to that, but you have the ability to either turn that switch on, or conversely, to to turn the switch off. And that is a function of some choices that we make with our lifestyle, nutrition being the biggest way to impact that, because the goal is to repair your gut. That is the best and most powerful way to lower your risk and even potentially lessen the symptoms associated with an autoimmune disease, potentially reverse an autoimmune disease. And again, I'm not saying that everybody's going to be able to do that, because I don't know that we have enough research to say that absolutely 100% of the people that eat a whole food, plant-based, high fiber diet have reversed all of their autoimmune disease. I cannot promise you that, but certainly we can manage symptoms. Certainly we can lower medication burden. I've seen that happen, right? Not needing to take as many sort of immune modulating medications, because we're not, we've turned down that response, right? Because we're you can create for health as well as for disease and worsening symptoms associated with the disease. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, let me know if you can or can't reach the course content. Comment about that, in there, but I would love to know that everybody's able to get that. And I apologize for all the stickiness with the video today. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful, and I'll see you guys next week, Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.